Hello, my name is Dr. Adele Pavlidis. I'm an interdisciplinary sociologist and lead author of this paper. My other authors include interdisciplinary sociologist Fullager and O'Brien, sport event management scholar Keneally, and exercise and sport scientist Minahan and Larson. We are working together to advance gender equity in sport. The paper I present today reports on a small part of this work that focuses on strength and conditioning coaches' understandings of gender difference. Recent successes of women in sports, particularly endurance sports, is challenging assumptions about what women's bodies can do. Greater inclusion and visibility of trans athletes is also influencing current debates about sex and gender. Gender is coming to matter in sport as more and more research demonstrates the ways that sexism, not sex, has been the cause of much exclusion and marginalisation from sport. Yet much of this knowledge, for example about sexism in sport, remains separate from sports science, as persistent silos between disciplines limit possibilities for change. There is growing acknowledgement of the importance and urgency of feminist science to address persistent problems that have failed to be addressed through perspectives that do not account for gender. By taking gender seriously as a complex, dynamic, and central aspect of sport, we contribute to better understanding of ways research, policy, and practice can better support athletes of diverse genders. The COVID-19 pandemic is one recent global phenomenon that has brought feminist science to the fore. Fairly early in the pandemic, researchers noticed higher mortality among men compared to women. Biomedical researchers took this data and automatically began to seek out biological sex-related factors to explain it. Feminist scientists, however, found that the sex disparities in case and mortality rates were not homogeneous and instead were context-specific. Things like mask wearing, hand washing, and compliance with public health and social distancing requirements are more likely to be adhered to by women and girls than by boys and men. The likely higher cases and mortality of men can also be explained by occupational differences, with many large clusters occurring in agriculture, manufacturing, and distribution. The meatpacking industry was the site of numerous hotspots with large gendered men workforces. If researchers have primary focus on biological sex-related variables to explain differences, they will sustain these two fallacies, as noted by Danielson et al. One, that sex is emphasized while excluding or minimizing other important variables, and two, that gender differences between women and men are improperly attributed to sex. Feminist work has slowly begun to make an important impact in sports science. One recent example is Thorpe and Clark's 2019 research, where they drew on interviews and data collected by sports scientists with 12 elite endurance sportswomen, revealing a culture of underfueling. Looking at the data collected by sports scientists, they found the averages that you see on the screen. Among their participants, there was an implicit and explicit understanding that leanness equated performance and beauty. There was a culture of leanness. LEA and REDS are unique health issues that have been identified in sportswomen. REDS is a complex health issue with acute and chronic implications. The women in Thorpe and Clark's study shared the implications of the training and dietary practices with their sport culture and their challenges to push back against the culture of leanness. Experiencing irregular periods or none at all, and bone injuries, which the women connected with their practice of underfueling in order to maintain a lean body, did not deter them from continuing the practice. Thorpe and Clark note, boundaries between the performing body and the both physiological and cultural demands of endurance sport become blurred, rendering the cultural and biological inseparable. Another key example is a 2021 paper by Parson, Cohen, and Becker, where they begin to articulate a gendered approach to ACL injuries. Girls and women experience ACLs up to 3 to 6 times more than men and boys, and for over 20 years, sports scientists have tried and failed to decrease the injury rate. Parsons et al. Found that in sport medicine literature, sex and gender, and female and woman were used interchangeably, without context or explanation, which is problematic for exploring gender and the ways it might affect sport performance and/or injury. They go on to raise a range of possibilities for plausible explanations for ACL injuries that focus on gendered influences rather than sex. They point towards the pre-sport environment, including early experiences of socialization, such as gendered parenting, toys, and different expectations for mobility. The training environment, with resistance training and increasing muscle seen as less socially acceptable for girls and women. The competition environment, where often there are different rules for women than men, and where girls and women may adopt hypermasculine traits as a way to fit in. And the treatment environment, where gendered assumptions can have negative effects on women's health. Even the most intrinsic injury risk factors can be strongly influenced by social expectations of gender. They write that it is sexism, not simply sex, that plays a role in ACL injury outcomes. It is to this that we developed this current study to start to understand strength and conditioning coaches' conceptions of sex and gender as a starting point for developing a way forward to both injury prevention and performance science that accounts for both. We drew on qualitative feminist methods to engage in meaningful conversations about gender differences with Level 3 strength and conditioning coaches. Expanding on Karen Barrad's conceptualization of intra-action, we conceived of the interviews as feminist interventions, where we provided a space of non-judgment and learning for the coaches to explore both their understandings and misunderstandings of gender difference. Through an iterative process of analysis, we developed 4 key ways the coaches understood difference: physical, emotional, communication, and environmental. Physical differences focus primarily on things like menstruation, women's weaker upper body and stronger lower body, breasts as sensitive or burdensome, and women athletes as masculine. Emotional differences, coaches talked about women athletes thought to have a better perspective on their sport. Many of the coaches also talked about how they believed that females were tougher than males, mentally stronger, more resilient. Crying and tears were also emphasized as a key difference. Communication difference. There was talk about the importance of gaining rapport. Trust was considered more important with sportswomen than men, and overwhelmingly it was thought that women asked more questions and were less likely to follow instructions without understanding why they were doing something. Environmental differences. A number of the coaches had international experience and they observed and experienced specific environmental differences. This is a very important aspect to examine and speaks to the need for intersectional approaches to gender difference. So how did they come to know these differences? They came to know these differences through observation only. Their knowledge was limited and they wanted to know more. They wanted to understand how to interpret their observations. They knew that they were limited in what they knew. They wanted to understand how to work with different bodies in ways that were not limiting. This research has implications for policy and practice, in particular rethinking education and the inclusion of gender studies within sports science to better understand sportswomen beyond limited biology. As feminist researchers, we ask, what does knowledge do? Many of our participants spoke about the complexity of gender in that it was something and nothing at once. The research conundrum remains as to how to trouble notions of sport and of athletes as somehow gender neutral, which permeates the idea that sport is the great leveler. How to carefully and without essentializing women theorize gender in sport and communicate this to those with intimate knowledge of women's high-performing bodies remains an area for further research. Thank you very much.